Cool. Welcome everybody to this webinar, Unlocking the Cloud Operating Model with GitHub Actions. I'm glad that you all could make it, and I hope that everyone is doing well and staying healthy. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to look at this topic where we'll be leveraging a couple of my favorite tools in a few different ways. We've got quite a bit of content to get through, so we'll probably leave questions until the end, but feel free to just throw them into the chat. And Ed is going to help me kind of keep on top of those, so if there's any kind of pressing questions that we need to get to right away, then Ed will kind of call those out for me. But before we kind of formally kick off here, I wanted to first quick introduce myself. So my name is Steve Winton, and you can find me on GitHub as @Swinton. I've been using GitHub for many years, actually since the year it first launched back in 2008, which feels like a lifetime ago now, right? But these days, it's my real privilege to work on the partner engineering team at GitHub, where I work closely with GitHub's many wonderful partners, including HashiCorp, where our goal is to enable the creation of products, tools, and workflows that benefit developers worldwide. And as you can see, if you can see my video, I'm working from home today. My kids are around. This could get disruptive, and if we're lucky, we'll have some interesting, potentially amusing interruptions at some point. You never know what might happen in the next hour. So today's agenda, if all goes to plan, I'd like to introduce a pattern for collaboration in the cloud that can be applied to both code and infrastructure using two of my favorite developer tools, Terraform and GitHub Actions. The patterns that we'll see today are actually the result of several months of collaboration between HashiCorp and GitHub. Everything you see is current and in many cases brand new, but is also immediately available for use. Our aim here is to reduce friction in the development cycle, often by eliminating context switching, and our goals are to encourage collaboration, consistency, repeatability, driving developer productivity in the software lifecycle. So I hope you find this useful. And before we actually dive in, I would like to take a moment, if I may, to tell you a little bit about a side project that I've been working on recently. So here's my side project. It's an app called Cakely, and I'm kind of branding it as this universal API for cake. I love cake, especially cake of the British variety, like a nice cherry bakewell, or even the occasional slice of Battenberg, just really puts me in a good mood. So this little side project, it's actually a labor of love for me, and you know what? I honestly feel it's the app the world needs right now. It's still in kind of active development, but it's a pretty hot idea, I'm sure you'll agree, so I hope to launch it very, very soon. And there are a few moving parts going on here with this app. I'm using Cloudflare for my DNS. I'm using Amazon Web Services, and in particular, their S3 storage service to serve my statically generated website, and I'm collaborating on GitHub for all of this. And one particular tool that I've grown fond of is Terraform. And Terraform allows me to kind of manipulate my infrastructure by defining it in code. And then by using Terraform's plan and apply commands, I can both review my changes before releasing them, before applying them to my production environment. Currently, I've been following this kind of command line workflow on my local machine for all of my operations. It's been working really well, but I would like to now move to something that's cloud-based, something that gives me kind of repeatability and scalability as my team grows, which I'm sure it will. So our goal here is to move these kind of client-side operations to the cloud. And I very much want to enable a team-centric workflow where essentially the team can git push both code and infrastructure to the cloud. I want to reduce context switching, and I want to gain productivity boosts. My plan to achieve this is to use GitHub Actions and Terraform together, so I can kind of codify my workflow in GitHub alongside the code for my application, infrastructure, and as we'll soon see, even my policy. And one kind of integral part of this is this set up Terraform action, this official action that is written and maintained by HashiCorp and is released under an open source license. One of the core kind of tenets of GitHub Actions that we'll see is that it leverages the GitHub graph and allows you to kind of reference works in your workflow that are produced by the community as you build out your own DevOps workflows. And these actions, like the one shown here, kind of essentially turn your repositories into these sort of executable functions that can run in the cloud in the context of a workflow that you define. And so we have this kind of nice community-based set of building blocks that enables countless ways to build and remix and reuse and to come up with interesting kind of workflows. Predominantly, these are written in JavaScript, and right now we have, I think, over 4,000 community actions live in the GitHub marketplace. So let's take a closer look. We're going to do a few demos here to show how this all fits together. And our first demo is just taking a quick look at how to get started. So let's do this. As I said, I've been working on this app, Cakely, which I'm really excited about. And I've been using this separate Cakely GitHub organization here. I have an app repo in my org which contains both my application code and my Terraform configuration files. So I'm managing my application and infrastructure side by side. Let's take a quick look at the website as it currently exists. So here it is. It's looking pretty good, I guess, but I do feel it could probably benefit from some styling. I'll hold my hands up. I'm not really a designer. I'm doing this all on my own, and I'm doing the best I can, but let's try and clean this up a little bit in our next release here. And as I said, I've been mostly working from the command line up until now. I would like to start using actions to give me this kind of common cloud-based workflow for reviewing and applying my changes. So to get started here, I need to jump into the Actions tab of my repository, and I see this kind of Getting Started page. And if I scroll down, I see these suggested kind of workflows and a Terraform starter workflow. So this looks interesting as a starting point. So let's see about setting up this workflow. So I'm presented now with a kind of YAML template that follows kind of a well-established pattern of using Terraform in the context of a pull request on GitHub. We can see here the workflow is initiated by any new pull request and a push to the default branch. One of the first things this workflow is going to do is it's going to install and configure Terraform for us. Going to check out the code, and then we're going to install and configure the Terraform CLI, leveraging this HashiCorp setup Terraform action that we saw earlier. So this code lives elsewhere on GitHub. As I said, it's maintained and released by HashiCorp. We don't have to write this ourselves in our workflows. We're literally kind of building on the shoulders of giants here. So next, our workflow is going to initialize our working directory for us. That means it's going to kind of load our remote state and download any modules that are needed by our Terraform configuration. After this, we'll run a quick check just to make sure our Terraform files conform to a canonical format. Then we'll generate a plan, and finally, we will apply this plan, but only when our changes land on the default branch, as kind of we can see by this if conditional here. So this is a good starting point, and honestly, this will probably just work for many users. But what's great is that we can customize this and do something a little bit different, which is what I would like to do now. So the first change I need to make is that I need to configure my environment to pass in some parameters that my Terraform configuration expects. And the way I can do that is by using this special kind of TF var syntax, and then I'm pulling these values from a secret store that is built into GitHub. These values in our secret store are encrypted, and they are opaque unless requested using this secrets syntax. And their values will be masked in our logs, which is nice. So we've got a few parameters here that we're configuring, mostly to do with our Cloudflare account. So the domain that we need, our email and API tokens so that we can authenticate, and then a DNS zone ID that our DNS records live in for this particular application. As I said, we're also using AWS and the S3 service to store and host our website. So we need to configure our environment with credentials that allow us to authenticate to AWS, for example, to manipulate those objects in our S3 buckets. And to configure AWS credentials, we need to use, or we can use another action in our workflow. And let's do this fairly early on. So I'm just going to drop this step in here. And again, similar to Hashi's setup Terraform action, AWS has also released an action that configures the action's runtime environment appropriately with AWS credentials. So as you can see here, again, this is kind of functionality that we don't have to reference ourselves. We don't have to write it ourselves. We can just leverage kind of the graph of GitHub to pull this in again. And I've previously configured secrets in my GitHub repo containing my AWS access keys and my region that I'm using. So I'm using US West 2. And then after this step completes in our workflow, we can actually securely authenticate with AWS services. Cool. So moving on through the rest of this workflow file, setup Terraform looks good to me. We're using this CLI config credentials token, which will authenticate us to Terraform Cloud, so we can manage our remote state that way. And this is quite nice. Using Terraform Cloud buys us a few nice things, such as state locking, which will help protect our state from getting corrupted. So that's really helpful. And I would like to make one more change to the workflow. What I would like to do is I would like to take the plan that gets generated and post it to the pull request as a comment, just to promote better visibility of the change being produced. So to do this, we need to consume the output produced by the Terraform plan step and then post it to the pull request as a comment. And actions is pretty smart, and it allows you to connect steps in a workflow to achieve this. So the first thing we need to do is give our plan step an ID. So we'll just give this step an ID of plan. And then second of all, I do want to remove kind of color formatting from the plan produced by Terraform, just so the output doesn't look garbled in our pull request. It'll be nice and readable. So we just add this kind of dash no color argument to the commands there. And we just need one more step now to actually use that output. So now I want to actually comment on the pull request. And again, we can use another third-party action to do this. In this case, we're going to use GitHub Script. GitHub Script allows you to essentially run some JavaScript code in your workflow. Here we're calling the GitHub API, and we're passing in the output from our plan step and using it to create our comment. We need to authenticate with the GitHub API, and Actions provides a secret for us automatically, this GitHub token, which will be scoped to our repo. And finally, we want to actually call the create comment command, passing in the body, which contains the plan that was produced for us earlier. So this workflow, I think, is looking pretty good now. We're only going to comment here when it's a pull request event, which is what we want. So I think I'm going to go ahead and commit this now. I'm going to give this a commit message. We'll just say set up Terraform, and I'm going to create a branch so I can review it first, and we'll just call that branch set up Terraform as well. So let's propose this change, and we will get this pull request open in our app repo. So because we are proposing kind of a new workflow file here, we should actually see that workflow start to run here in just a sec, and we'll see some feedback start to flow into our pull request so we can review it. We can click on the details link down here, but I typically prefer to look at it in the checks tab so I stay within the context of my pull request. So I'm going to speed things up here a little bit, fast forward in time so we can see the results here, and everything is looking green, which is good. And the apply step was skipped, which is what we want because we haven't merged this yet. We want to review before we do that. So yeah, let's take a look. And if we hop back over to the conversation tab here, we now see a comment from GitHub Actions on our pull request containing the plan that would be applied when this merges. So we can review this plan. This looks pretty much what I was expecting. We are updating the bucket resource here because I want to apply some styling to my website and hopefully make it look a little bit better. So there's this pending change, which this looks good. But before I merge this, I actually would like to make one more change to my pull request, which is to add a nice status badge to my README. So let's jump over to the README here and let's edit this. And using Markdown here in the body of my README page, I can add a status badge. So this will just give us a nice kind of visual indicator that everything in our repo is running as it is supposed to. And then let's commit this back to the pull request. We'll just give a commit message. I try and keep my commit messages fairly meaningful, and we'll push this back to our branch and check it out in the pull request. And let's see that feedback start to flow in once more. Okay. So we've got another plan now because we did produce another commit. The plan is still detecting a change to be applied, which makes sense. And I always do a very quick final check over of everything. I just want to make sure that I'm not introducing any kind of cruft when I merge this, but everything looks good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and merge this pull request. And I always like to clean up my branches after I merge, so I'm going to delete this branch. So everything is nice and clean in my repo. Okay, so now that has merged, now the fun part actually begins. So our merge to the default branch will now trigger the apply step in our workflow. So we can see here our workflow is running again, but now in response to the push event. So the comment step there is skipped, but the apply step is now running. So it's actually going to apply those changes that we just saw. And this all looks successful. This all looks good. So let's go check out our README. We should see a nice green Terraform parsing badge, which we do. So this looks good. And let's just take another look at the website now. And I mean, it's still maybe not the most beautiful website in the world, but it's getting there. And I've got some nice branding and styling on our website that's loaded here for us to check out. Cool, so what we've just seen here is an application of what we refer to as the GitHub flow. It's a branch-based workflow that puts the pull request and collaboration in the middle of any proposed changes to your code. It's a sane, repeatable workflow that we use ourselves at GitHub, both to build GitHub and even to operate parts of our business that are running on GitHub. The workflow that we've seen is a great start, but I do see an opportunity to improve it. So let's take a closer look here. I think I'd like some additional kind of gates and checks in the process just to make sure that every change that we introduce is a good change. So, okay, now let's build on what we've just done. We've got a nice automated, centralized, collaborative process for change. But as I said, I would like to introduce some controls that will give me even more confidence in our process. Specifically, I'd like to add some branch protection to my app repo. And this will help ensure that the plan that gets approved and merged from the pull request actually matches the plan that then gets applied when it runs on the default branch. So GitHub helpfully exposes some controls to configure branch protection. So over here in the settings for our app repo, we can configure a branch protection rule. And for our default branch, we can require that the Terraform workflow we just defined is successful before it can be merged. And we can also require that the pull request head is up to date with its base branch before it can be merged. This means that any branch must contain all the changes that are already on the default branch before it can be merged into that branch. And this will help ensure that the plan that's generated in the pull request is the one that gets applied when the change lands. So this is all, this is kind of what we want, this policy. And I could just apply this right here and right now, but I think it would be better if I could kind of define this policy as code. And we can actually use Terraform to manage this policy for us, thanks to the GitHub Terraform provider, which is provided by the community. So let's set this up and see what it looks like in practice. It makes sense for this policy to not live in the app repo because it's controlling that repo. It makes sense for it to live outside of that repo, and then we can isolate it with separate access controls. So I'd like to configure this workflow at an organization level, and the .github repo here is a good home for this, as this repo can contain other org level configurations such as issue and pull request templates. So I'm going to go ahead and work in this .github repo now. So we'll set up our workflow here to control branch protections in the app repo. And we can see I prepared some Terraform configurations here earlier, a main.tf and so on, that use the GitHub provider and reference our organization, and then control the app repo in that organization by applying this branch protection resource. And we're going to require the Terraform status check to be successful, a strict check, which means that the head branch must be up to date with the based branch. And just for good measure, I'm going to require pull request reviews as well, just so that any incoming change must be approved by another team member. So this configuration accurately represents the branch protection policy that we would like to introduce. And we can manage this in the same way that we saw previously through the Terraform starter workflow. So let's jump back to our Actions tab again. And as this is a new repo, we don't have any workflow configured yet. So again, let's use the suggested Terraform workflow as our starting point. And you can write your own workflow from scratch. You don't have to use these templates, but I find it helpful to have some kind of basis to start off with, even if I'm then going to go and modify it. So this workflow should look a bit more familiar by now. I'm going to do the same approach as last time. I'd like to make a couple of changes. The first change I need to make is to configure some environment variables, again, using that kind of TF var syntax to populate some important parameters that I need in my repo. So we've done that now. And we've got our TF var variable here, which is what we want. And yeah, that's looking good. And we have this community action that can help us out. So I need to authenticate with my organization this time. Previously, we used the GitHub secret, which is generated for us, but now we're controlling a repo that isn't the one where the workflow is running. So I need to use this generate token step instead. This will generate a token that's scoped to our Cakely organization. And so I'm just going to add a comment to describe what this step is doing. It's generating a token that we can use across my organization. And again, this step is consuming a couple of secrets that we need to generate our token that I defined earlier. So let's make sure this token is available to the Terraform plan step so that Terraform can authenticate with the repo where our branch protection is needed. We need to add an environment variable to this step, which will be derived from the token produced by our earlier generate token step. So let's just paste this in. And we need to repeat this for when we apply the plan. So I'm going to take that environment configuration and I'm going to just add it down beneath at the end here to our apply step as well. Cool, so this looks good. And then same as we did last time, I'm going to change this workflow to preserve the generated plan on the pull request as a new comment. So we've seen this before, we've seen this already, so I'm going to fast forward in time again. We've got the ID on the plan step, and we can use that GitHub script action to create the comment on the pull request with the plan output. Right, this should be pretty usable now. So I'm going to go ahead and commit it, and we'll open up a pull request to review our change. Let's create a separate branch, a setup Terraform branch, and let's create this PR. I generally like to self-assign my pull requests just so my team knows that this pull request has an owner. And we should see some feedback on our change start to flow in now. And again, let's fast forward in time to see the feedback here. And we should see our plan on the conversation tab here. This looks accurate. This is showing our branch protection that will be applied, which is the one that we want. So I think this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and merge this, and let's delete our branch. And let's now go and switch back over to the Actions tab, and we can see our workflow running in the Actions tab. This time it will get applied. So the comment with plan is skipped, plan is running, this looks good. And let's just verify now that this change landed as expected. So I'm going to jump back over to my app repo. I want to jump into the settings here. Let's look at the branches. And we see now a new protection rule has been set up for our default branch. We're requiring that the pull request must be reviewed before it can be merged. And we're also requiring that Terraform passes and that the branch is up to date. So this is exactly what we want, but now it's preserved as code, giving us a repeatable kind of versioned policy, again, managed by Terraform and powered by GitHub Actions. Cool. So now we've got this really nice workflow. Let's put it into practice by introducing an infrastructure change to our application. And one thing I would love to do as I'm using my new Cakely organization in GitHub here is I would love to have a nice verified badge on my organization page. So verified GitHub orgs like HashiCorps here get this really nice looking verified badge on their org page. I would like to have the same badge on my Cakely org. I feel a little bit left out. So the way this is done is through a special DNS record that proves to GitHub that you own the domain associated with your org. So I'm going to do this, and guess what? I'm going to use Terraform and Actions to manage this for me, using the Cloudflare Terraform provider to manipulate our DNS records. So the first thing I need to do is I need to just add the domain I want to verify, which I can do via my organization settings page. So let's add the domain here. I'm going to add my cakely.app organization. And when I add this, GitHub tells me that I need to add a DNS record using this generated shortcode as the value. So I'm going to copy this code and I'll share it with my Terraform workflow by defining a corresponding secret in my GitHub org. So let's jump down to the secrets settings in my organization. And you can see here all the secrets that I've defined. These are all the organization level, but can be overridden at the repo level as well. So I have this secret already DNS verification code that I need to edit. So let's go ahead and update this. And I will paste in the code that I copied earlier. The cool thing about secrets, as mentioned earlier, is that they're kind of write-only. So once this is saved, I'll be able to see that it exists, but I won't be able to read the value in any way. It's entirely kind of opaque to me. So let's save this. And let's see now how we can manage our DNS through Terraform and Actions. So I'm going to head back over to my app repo. And here is a branch that I prepared earlier, an add DNS entry branch. So let's open the pull request and we can review the changes. So if I scroll down here, we can see the diff. And in our Terraform workflow file, we're now pulling in that DNS verification code secret that we just created, setting it to an environment variable. And then in our DNS Terraform configuration, we're adding a new record, which will essentially materialize as the text DNS record that GitHub needs. Other than this, we're using the exact same workflow previously and the branch configuration, that we just introduced so that we can apply this change safely and repeatably. So I'm going to create this pull request, and again, we'll see the feedback start to flow in. We can see now that I need a review on my PR. So hopefully one of my team members will give me a review here in a second. Otherwise, we could be waiting a while. And the feedback is flowing in. My Terraform plan is running, and obviously the apply step was skipped. The plan step looks as I expecting, so I'm seeing that new txt DNS record with the value that GitHub requires. And as I said, we do need a review. So let me just take a sip of my drink, and hopefully we'll get someone to review this for us. All right, cool. So my teammate Steve Winton has hopefully reviewed this change for me. So I feel really good about this change now, and my teammate feels good about it too. So let's go ahead and merge this. And I will delete the branch. And let's see the workflow running now with that change on the default branch. So this all looks good. Let's go back to our organization. And let's continue verifying the domain. So back in verified domains, there's my cakely.app domain. Let's continue verifying. Let's verify it now. And if I jump back to my org profile page, we see that nice verified badge showing up on our org profile. So I feel much better with that showing up there now. Cool. Okay, finally, one last workflow, one last demo. I want to now just look at introducing an application change following this same workflow. So we've introduced this kind of policy, and we're managing our infrastructure, which is nice. I would like to kind of enhance my workflows by introducing maybe some integration tests for the application to give me kind of increased confidence in any changes that are being introduced to my production environment. And I'm going to be a little bit lazy or maybe creative, depending on your point of view. And instead of actually writing integration tests by hand, I'm just going to use this community action screenshot website, which will just take a screenshot of my website as it exists at a specific commit SHA, and it'll do that across Windows, Mac, and Linux. There's a snippet here in the README, and it looks like I can just copy and paste it into my workflow. So let's go ahead and set this up with a separate workflow. So in my app repo, here's another branch I prepared earlier, a screenshot website branch, and let's take a look at this. And in this branch, it contains a screenshot website.yaml, which will run on every pull request against the default branch. And the main step is down here on line 22 to 28. We're going to run the screenshot website action. We're going to use the checked out index.html as the source, and we'll take a screenshot at the full page length. And interestingly here, we're employing like a matrix strategy, which allows us to run the same workflow across a set of parameters. We can test then how the page looks at different page widths and across different operating systems. So this looks like a valuable change. So I'm going to create this pull request. Okay, and then again, back in our checks tab, as well now as our Terraform workflow running on a pull request, we also have our screenshot website workflow running as well. And we can see, thanks to our matrix strategy, this workflow has spawned multiple jobs, one for each operating system and page width combination in our workflow. So let's wait for these all to complete. Cool, so our workflow has generated all these artifacts for us, which represent all the screenshots that were taken. And what I'd like to do is take a look at the Ubuntu screenshot. I don't have an Ubuntu machine, so it's helpful for me to be able to review it in this way. So let's check out the Ubuntu one. Okay, so that's actually unfortunately not looking too good. So while the app looks pretty good on my Mac, apparently it's not looking so hot on Ubuntu. The Cakely logo isn't showing up at all. But this is a helpful enhancement to my workflow. It's revealed this UI bug that obviously I'd like to fix, but I'm going to preserve this workflow as well. It's valuable to me. So back on the PR, we can see that the pull request has been approved. Our infrastructure is already up to date. So let's preserve this workflow. We'll merge it, and we will delete the branch. Cool. Let me try and wrap this up quickly now to try and fix this bug. So it just so happens I have a branch prepared already that I'd like to try. So let's push this up and check it out. And let's open up a pull request and review the changes that I prepared. So in the diff here in the pull request page, we can see that I found we weren't sending an appropriate content type header, so we're going to attempt to fix that here. And also, I decided to use a Twitter library, this Twamoji library, to render our emoji logo on the page, and this will look nice and consistent across all operating systems now, I hope. Also encoding the emoji characters using the appropriate HTML entities. I'm such a nerd. And as well, I'm introducing some S3 bucket configuration changes, just setting the appropriate content type and UTF-8 encoding for those bucket objects. And finally, for good measure, I'm a fan of fave icons, so I'm going to add a fave icon to my website, which will also be served from our S3 bucket. So let's create this pull request and review the changes. And unfortunately, the first thing that I notice here is that our base branch, so our head branch, is out of sync with master. And so we need to update it before we can merge according to our policy. So let's take care of that. We can do that directly in the pull request as well. And this is going to result in a further new commit and a new set of workflows being fired off, which is fine. So let's wait for our workflows to run, and screenshot website is again spawning multiple jobs as before, thanks to our matrix strategy. So our Terraform plan has been produced. Let's go check it out in our pull request. We can see those bucket changes, which I was expecting. We can see the content encoding that will be applied and our fave icon here. And this comment actually got duplicated because it ran on the two commits. We can talk about how to fix that in the Q&A. And let's check about the screenshots too, to see if I managed to actually fix that UI bug. So let's take a look again over here in the screenshot websites workflow. Again, let's go and look at it on Ubuntu and see if it's looking any better now. So here's the branding now on Ubuntu. It's looking much better, nice and consistent now across operating systems. And what's cool about this is that I've generated a screenshot and I haven't even touched the production environment. So I'm really happy with this fix. I am going to go ahead and I think I'll merge this pull request. Let's go ahead, merge. And like always, delete the branch. And one last time, let's see these changes get applied from the default branch. So here's our merge commit. Here's our Terraform workflow running. Note, we're not generating screenshots now. We only do that for the pull request event, and this is a push event. So our Terraform plan is being generated thanks to our branch protection that will match the plan in the pull request. And now that is getting applied. And that's all completed successfully. Our Terraform badge is still nice and green, which makes me very happy. And let's check out our website, cakely.app, the universal API for Cake. And everything is rendering beautifully. And we have a nice, consistent process for introducing policy, infrastructure, and code, all managed through Terraform and powered by GitHub Actions. So that kind of concludes our demos for today. I'd like to just take a few remaining minutes just to quickly summarize what we saw. So in these demos, in this webinar, we introduced a common workflow for safely and repeatably and at scale introducing changes around policy. We saw our branch protection get applied. For introducing infrastructure changes, we added some DNS records. And for application code, we fixed a UI bug. So this common workflow is collaborative. It puts the pull request at the center, and it's powered by Terraform and managed by GitHub Actions. In case you're completely new to GitHub Actions, this is actually the #1 CI service on GitHub. It's been publicly available since November 2019. It's kind of GitHub's platform for automating your workflow with first-class support for CI/CD. And as we saw, it's kind of modeled on open source, leveraging the GitHub graph so you can pull in actions that other people have written and build on the work of others. It allows you to compose kind of DevOps workflows from reusable building blocks supported by community and partner actions. And we also saw this Terraform starter workflow. We use this in all of our demos as a starting point. It's a great way to get started with infrastructure as code using GitHub Actions, and it allows both developers and operators to automate their infrastructure and code changes. If you are interested in providing your own actions kind of building blocks using JavaScript, like the ones we saw today, set up Terraform, configure AWS, and so on, GitHub has this framework actions toolkit to help get you started. And if you are a provider of cloud services, it might be a good idea to create actions as reusable building blocks to make it easier for your customers to use your services in their workflows. Lastly, if you're interested in learning more about how HashiCorp and GitHub are working together, we recently announced this joint white paper released last month, which was co-authored between our organizations and discusses how HashiTools and the GitHub platform can work together to enable organizations in this kind of new DevOps landscape and increase developer velocity. As well, later this year, we'll be coming out with more announcements. We're continuing to work closely with HashiCorp, including the Terraform product teams and other teams. So look out for more exciting announcements later this year. So thank you. I really sincerely do hope that this was helpful. And before I get back to developing Cakely.app further, I'm happy to hang on for a bit and see if there are any questions or comments in the chat. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
All right. We actually have a few questions, Steve. I think the first one I was going to share with you, I think, is the kind of the last one that came through. So is there a graphic visual interface to add parameter configurations in the setup files?
That's a great question. So if you are familiar with some of the history around actions, the initial release did include a visual UI that's been replaced for now with a YAML editor. So the YAML editor is pretty rich. It can suggest changes for you, or kind of bring up prompts to auto-complete what you're writing. I believe there are plans to reintroduce the visual editor, but that had to get deprioritized in the interim. So yeah, it's a good question. I see another question here that's pretty interesting. Are you able to write your own organization controls as GitHub Actions? So what's possible today is pretty rich from my perspective. So what we used when we were setting up the branch protection policy, we used the GitHub Terraform provider, which is open source. I'm not part of maintaining that, although I do follow it with pretty keen interest. And I believe it has good coverage and it's open source if you wanted to extend it. So yeah, I would definitely encourage folks to check that out. So let's see. Here's another good question. So does GitHub Enterprise support GitHub Actions? So currently not, but if you caught our GitHub Satellite event, which I think was only last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, we talked about support for actions coming to GitHub Enterprise Server this year. There's also GitHub Enterprise kind of in the cloud which the enterprise product on github.com supports actions, and their on-prem enterprise product support is coming this year. Maybe take a couple more questions. So, is there a pattern for stashing the plan from the pull request and using it in the apply? Yeah, actually, I believe you could commit the plan back to the pull request, and then when it merges, you could take that plan and apply that one out. This is the beauty of kind of the actions product and the kind of granular or fine-grained steps. You can compose your own workflows. So I would definitely encourage folks to experiment with that. In my demo, I took great pains to try and ensure that there wouldn't be like drift by setting up those branch protections. So I do recommend at the very least that you create those branch protections. And also when I was building these demos, it occurred to me the importance of using a remote state that supports locking. Because you don't want to have two plans running at once, which could happen if lots of pull requests kind of merge at once. So Terraform Cloud I recommend as a great kind of remote state that you could leverage, and I think that there are others as well that support state locking. And I'll say as well, feel free to reach out to me. So my GitHub email address is my handle, swinton@github.com. So if there's a question or a topic, then yeah, feel free to reach out to me personally, and I'll do my best to follow up with you.
There's one question that I think a couple of people asked that I was reading through the beginning, and it seems that your repo, the one that you share right now, is private. Is that something we can make public to share with them as well?
Yeah, so I can look into that. I just need to get my legal team to make sure it's all looking good from a licensing perspective. But yeah, I would like to do that as well. Yeah, so thank you. It's a great point.
Great, and I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much again, Steve, for being part of the event today. And we'll try to, we see that there's a couple of other questions that are flowing through. Like, we'll be able to actually get a list of all the questions that you have. So we'll be able to follow up after the event as well. So don't worry, we'll try to get to all the questions that we can after the session as well.
Totally, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool, thank you.